Can you see my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we start talking about apex trigger. So let's first of all understand what is apex trigger. Uh, an apex trigger is apex code that executes before or after the following types of operations. So it's just a piece of code which can be executed before or after following operations. Which all operations? All the DML operations. Insert, update, delete, undelete. Okay, so if you feel that okay, I don't want my apex code to get executed through a user interface, I don't want someone to click on a button and then execute the code. So one way which you can think of for executing your code is at the time of DML operations, before a DML operation happens or after a DML operation happens. It can be before insert or after insert or before update or after update, that sort of thing. Fine. So that is what an apex trigger is. So this is the code that executes before or after insert, update, delete, and undelete. All right. Okay. So that's what apex trigger is. Now, what are the different types of apex triggers? There are two types of apex triggers. All right. Before triggers. Okay. So before triggers are used to update or validate record values before they are saved to the database. So before trigger is something which executes before a data is created or updated. Okay, so it validates the data. So I can put some condition to be checked, some code to get executed, some criteria to be checked before the record is actually inserted into the database. And if it does not meet certain criteria, then I can just throw some error based on some criteria. So that's a before trigger. There's another type of trigger which is called after trigger. What is an after trigger? After triggers are used to access field values that are set by the system and to effect changes in other records. Got it? So this is used to access the field values of the record which just got inserted. So if I say after insert, so I must be talking about some record which is getting inserted, right? So there must be some data in context. So when I say after insert, the data which is in context, okay, this after trigger takes the value from that record. Okay, so this is used to access field values that are set by the system and to effect changes in other records. So it can make changes in other records. It can check the value from the existing record, the one which got inserted or updated, and take the value from that and make changes in some other records. Okay, the records that fire the after trigger are read only. So the record which is in context, the one which got inserted, that is read only. Okay. So it's a simple logic. Let's say you're entering a record into the system and your trigger gets executed at this point, at that point of time. Let's say my record is IBM Limited, which is getting inserted into the database. All right. Now, whatever value assignment you want to do for that record, that needs to be done in before triggers. If you want to set the industry of the record using the trigger, that should be done using before trigger. Okay, that should not be done after trigger. So you cannot say that after insert, go and update the value of the industry or some field. After that you can only access the value. So that is what it is saying here. After triggers are used to access field values. Once it has been set, it can only access field values because those records after trigger are read only. Okay, so whatever updates or updations or setting the value needs to be done on the record needs to be done using before triggers. Why do we need after triggers? Then I can use after trigger to take the values, access the values from there, and make some changes on some other record. It can affect some other records, but not the actual record which just got created or updated. Clear? So these are the two types of apex triggers that we have. Now let's understand the syntax of the trigger. So are we clear so far? What is it? What is an apex trigger and two different types of apex triggers and what they actually do? Why we need before triggers and why we need after triggers? Before trigger is for setting the values and all that stuff,
Yes.
or validating the data. After trigger is for accessing those values and performing some changes or something on some any other thing apart from editing that record. Anything else you can do apart from editing that record, because that record becomes a read-only record after trigger. Okay. Okay. Now let's understand the trigger syntax. So our trigger syntax is pretty simple. Sorry. To define a trigger, use the following syntax: trigger, trigger name on object name, trigger events, there's code block, finish. Okay. So let me write it for you so that you understand it better. So this trigger always has to be for a certain object. Okay. The trigger always is defined for a certain object. Let's say you will define a trigger for contact. And you can say that, okay, every time a contact is getting created, before insert, check whether email id is there or not. If the email id is not there, throw an error. Okay, so that sort of thing. So our trigger syntax is pretty simple. We write it like this: trigger, name of the trigger, which can be abcd, whatever you want, on object name, which can be again any object, any Salesforce object. Event, when do you want your trigger to get executed? Okay, on insert or before insert, after insert, so that part needs to be written here. Then you write your code block here and then finish it off. So this is syntax. The user keyword trigger, write the name of the trigger, on object name, give the events, and then write your code block here and then just close it. That's it. So let's say I want to write a trigger on contact. I can write it like this: trigger T1 on contact. Okay. If I want the code to get executed before a record is inserted in contact, I will write before insert, whatever my code block, whatever I want to do, I will write it here and then close it. That's it. This is how simple a trigger is. Okay. So that's the syntax of the trigger. Now let's understand about the events. What all events we have? Okay. So this is what we just saw, right? How it is done. Now let's talk about the events. What are events? Trigger events can be a comma separated list of one or more of the following events. So these are the events which are allowed. Before insert. Okay, so if you use before insert event, then what will happen? The code block will get executed before a new record is being inserted in this object. Okay, before a contact is created. Before update, if you use before update event, then the code will get executed before a new record is updated in this object. Before delete, so before delete will work before you delete a record. After insert, after update, after delete. Okay, so we just saw that we have 4 types of operations which trigger works with. If you go into the previous slide, you see insert, update, delete and undelete. So 4 types of events we have, right? Now the types of apex triggers are before triggers and after triggers, right? So the events are before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, 6. Okay, and after undelete. So undelete is when a record which has been moved to the recycle bin is restored. That is called undelete. You deleted some record and then you go to recycle bin and restore that. That is called undelete. Okay. So there is nothing called before undelete, because at that time the record is already not there in this. Okay, but there is something called after undelete. Got that?
Yes, yes. Got
So
it.
that's about the events. All right, so these are the 7 events which we can use, and you don't have to use only one of these events, you can use multiple events also. Like for example, let's say I want to perform some validation before the contact is created. I just give you an example that before a contact is created, I just want to go and check whether the email ID is there or not. All right, now when I want to do that, in that case I might want to do the same code block getting executed before the record is inserted, as well as before a new record is updated, before an existing record is updated. Okay, so there I can use two events. So you can use two events here. So you can use multiple events which should be comma separated list. So just, if you want to use two events, then you can just put a comma between them. That's it. Okay, clear? So syntax wise,
Yes.
event wise, we have understood. Now there is one more thing that we have to understand before we can write the code. Okay. Okay. So before I talk about that aspect, let's do a bit of brainstorming. Okay. Now you try to write a code here. Okay. This is a syntax. Apex, you know, right? So I am just gonna share this code with you. Take it, open a notepad, copy the code, open a notepad. Please share your screen also so that I can see that.
I shared my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
No, not able to see your screen.
Yeah, it's in the sharing mode, G.
Okay, let me make myself as presenter and then change you. Can you try sharing now? Yeah, now I can see your screen. So just copy the trigger code from here and put it in the notepad. All right. So trigger syntax is fine, right? What I want to do is I just want to write a simple logic here in the code block section. I want to write a simple logic that if the email ID is null, then maybe, just do anything. Okay. So how will you write that? Okay. Yeah, start writing it. Let me see how much you understand the Apex programming by now. So if I say if email equals null, how will it understand which email I'm talking about? What is email? Is it a variable, a field, coming from some record? What is email? You need to define some variable somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So
Do I need to how to declare?
Do you know Apex? You should know how to declare. What can be the data type for this?
Integer?
Every variable in
Sorry,
Apex
string, string,
requires.
string,
Sorry, go ahead.
string.
If it is a string, means we it's string, and we supply the value for it. But are we talking about string here, or are we talking about a field called email? I'm talking about email field, right?
Yeah.
This
Then
email is
contact.
not just a string, right? So this should be what? This should be.
I'm not getting.
Sorry. Think about it. Think about it. What data type? Okay. First question: what data type should it be? If you say, if you start,
Contact.
huh?
S object.
Yes, correct. Now you're thinking about it. All right. So go ahead, define an S object. Okay, brilliant. Good, fine. So that is what I needed. Now we had to define the S object here, right? But how will you say that this S object contact C is the record which is getting inserted? Your contact C is a new contact, right? So if it's a new contact, then value also needs to be provided by us. So how will I say that this, C is the contact which is getting created? Got it? So for that, we have
Yes.
some context variables. So you got the challenge, right? So where we get stuck, I actually
Correct.
wanted you to understand that part. So what you are writing is correct. Just that, how will I set up a connection between this context C, which is a new record, and the actual record, which is in context? Okay, the record which is getting inserted, I just need to access the value of the record which is in context, which is being inserted. That's it, right? So for that we need context variables. Now since you have written it, now you understand why we need context variable. If I get a context variable, I can just simply compare email for that, if it is null or not, and then I can write my own logic, right? Then I don't have to define a new S object and stuff like that. Okay, because new S object is something which is not required here. So now let's come back to my screen, and we will see the context variable, the next thing. Okay, so here we are. Trigger context variables. Okay, all triggers define implicit variables that allow developers to access runtime context. Okay, so there are context variables which you can use to access the runtime context, the runtime records. Okay, so that you don't have to define the S object from your side and all that stuff. All right, so there are some default variables, or these are some default methods which return you the values of the context. Okay, so one of this is insert. Okay, so this is a method which will return true if this trigger was fired due to an insert operation. Okay, so this will return true if the trigger was fired due to an insert operation. Same way I have is update. Okay, so this is also a default method which returns false. So the return type for this is boolean. It can return a true or false. So this returns true if this trigger was fired due to an update operation. Is delete will return true if the trigger was fired due to a delete operation. Is before, is after, is the undelete. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 6 that you see here are all having return type boolean, and they will return true if the trigger was fired due to that particular operation because of insert or update and all that. Okay, so trigger.new. So this new is the method which will return a list of new version of the SObject records. Okay, so this returns the list of SObject records. So you don't have to define a new SObject there. You can use this new thing there. Okay, this SObject list is only available in insert and update triggers. So we were trying to do an insert trigger, right? So it is available for us. So instead of defining your own list, okay, uh, let's come here and let me just talk about what you were writing. Okay, let's pick it from what you were writing. You said this, right? Okay, now do you think we should write it for a single record, or this I should use this list of contact? What is a better approach and why? So while I'm writing a trigger, shall I consider writing it for a single record or for multiple records?
For multiple records.
Why?
Because at the same time, multiple record can come inside, right? So
When will that happen?
like if I insert one record, then if somebody inserts one record, then
No,
that time two records will come inside.
no, not like that. That will happen if there is a bulk operation happening. Got it? Not that you are inserting and the other person is inserting. If a bulk operation is happening, if someone is trying to insert a list, then what will happen? If a list is being inserted with 10 records, okay, there's an insert operation happening with 10 records, then what will happen? Trigger will check the first record. If it is fine, it will not check the other 9 records because my trigger is checking only one record, right? So for that reason, it should always be a list, correct? So trigger always needs to be written for bulk records because there can be bulk data operations. Okay. So even if it's a single record, bulk operation will work fine. Okay. So here the variable that I need should always be a list. Okay. Now instead of redefining this list, so this is something which was not required. I needed a list of contacts. I just want to make sure that I am checking the list of contacts. Now this trigger dot this instead of I defining this, Salesforce has given us that context variable trigger dot new. Okay, this trigger dot new returns the list of records which are being inserted. So I don't have to worry about defining the S object and all that stuff. All that I need to do is I just need to go and check within this trigger dot new. So trigger dot new is a list of records being inserted or updated. So that's it. So I don't need to do this long thing. Instead of that, I can simply use this terminology, and so this is called a context variable. So these are predefined variables from Salesforce, and we can use it. So we don't have to write this line anymore. All that I have to do is I just have to go and check within this trigger.new whether the records have email ID or not. Right? Now my life becomes easier. So that is what it is. So that's what a context variable is. Correct? So this trigger.new, all these variables are called with a prefix of trigger dot. So it should be trigger dot is insert, trigger dot is update, trigger dot is delete, trigger dot is before, that way. So this trigger.new will return a list of new versions of the SObject records. Note that this SObject list is only available in insert and update trigger. Okay, so this is available only for insert and update trigger. Just for the new map. Okay, this is a map of IDs to the new version of the SObject records. Okay, so this is basically, this returns a map of IDs and the records. Okay, same way we have old, this returns a list of records which are being deleted. So this is available for update and delete trigger only. Old map, again same, it can create a map of IDs and the records. And we have size. Okay, so this trigger.size is the total number of records in a trigger invocation, both old and new. So trigger.size is basically what is the total number of records being what do you say, processed through that trigger. Okay, so if there are 50 records, so trigger.size will return 50. So this will basically return a number. Correct? So these are context variables. Now the moment we start using an example, you will understand this. Concept wise, I think more or less you have understood things, right? Please let me know if there is any difficulty understanding any of these concepts before I get into the example.
Yeah, I got it.
So it will become more clear the moment we try, start talking about an example. Okay. So how to create the trigger and where to create the trigger? To create a trigger, what you have to do is you just have to go to that particular object for which you want to create the trigger. Okay. Let's say I want to create a trigger for contact. So I should go to customize contacts, and then there is something called triggers here. Okay. Just click on triggers, click on new. Okay. Syntax is here. Let's say trigger CT1 event before insert, right? And then you write for, okay. Now, because we are gonna deal with a list of records and we have to check each value inside that. When I say that trigger.new always returns a list of records, right? And I need to check each value. I just can't check the first value and leave it. So for that reason, I have to always use a for loop here. For contact C within trigger dot new. Okay. So instead of saying that, okay, defining a new list and all, trigger dot new is already the list of records. So I say for contact C within trigger dot new, just go ahead and check if C dot email is null, C dot add error, no email. Okay, a lot simpler than what you thought, isn't it? So we just don't have to do anything. They have, huh? Sorry.
I said yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you thought while you started, writing, you thought that you will have to define this object and then you'll have to do some sort of connection. But this one keyword or this context variable trigger.new makes our life so much easier. And make sure that you're always using a for statement here, because then only it's gonna check all the records there, right? So it checks. Now, if there is only one record, that's all, it works absolutely fine for that. If there are 100 records, it works fine for that as well. So then it goes and it checks if c.email equals null, it should throw an error. And you have an option of making the trigger active or inactive. So only when a trigger is active, then it will work. If it is not active, then it will not work. So, more like our workflow rules and validation rules and stuff. So let me have this as active. Try to create a new contact. A. Try to save it. Throws an error. There is no email here. Right? Okay. Now let's say I supply the email ID here, abcd at xyz.com. Try to save it now. Saved. Alright. Now if I edit this record and delete the email ID, I'm trying to edit the record and delete the email ID. Now if I save it, will it throw an error or will it save the record? Now if I try to save it, will it
Yeah,
throw an error or save the record?
yeah, it will throw an error.
Sure.
Sure. The before operation is for insert and update, right?
Did not throw error. Why?
Only before.
Only before? So what is the event that we have used? Insert. So this event,
Update. Yeah.
this at this point of time, it is only before insert, right? So it executes the code block only when a new record is being created. Got that?
Yeah.
Please let me know if there is any question or doubt on this. Not clear?
Clear, Jeet. We need to write before update as well. Then only it will
Yes,
throw
right.
error.
Absolutely correct. So if you want, so now the good thing about this trigger is that I have control over if I just want to want some code to get executed on before insert or only on before update. All right. Or if you just want it to get executed for insert as well as update, so just make it before insert, before update. That's it. See this? Now if I go and edit this and try to save it, then it will throw an error even for an update operation. Okay, because the events have been used that way. Right? Okay. Okay. So now, if I want to have two different, logics running in, one logic running for before insert and the other logic running for before update. In that case, how will I deal with that? Let's say, okay. So let's take this same example. What I want to do is I want to execute the same logic but throw different error messages. Okay. If the record is being inserted, my error message should say you cannot create a new record with without email. If the error has occurred because of update operation while the record is being updated, then I want to throw some other message. You cannot save an existing record without email. Please uh, provide email. Okay, so that's it. So I want to throw two different error messages for two different events. Then how do we do that? In this case, we will require the other context variable that we were talking about, is insert and is update. Is insert returns true if the trigger was fired due to insert operation. So I'll use this context variable to check if the trigger is fired due to an insert operation, and then based on that we will do things. Okay. So what I have to do is, just give me 1 second. Okay. So let me comment out this part, what we have written, and let's write the other part. This time I want the if insert logic also to be checked. All that I have to do is I just have to write for contact C within trigger.new. So this is how it was earlier. No changes here. You have to write if trigger dot is insert. So if it's an insert trigger and C dot email equals null, then you want some error to be thrown. Let's say C dot add error, else C dot add error So for the first condition, the error is going to be you cannot create a new record. For the second condition, error is all right. Okay, so it will go and check if it's an insert, if it's a trigger which has been executed due to an insert operation, then it will throw this error. If it is because of something else, the only other option is update, then it will throw this error message. So now try to save it. You cannot save an existing record without email. But if you were trying to create a new contact, then it would have thrown you the other error. If you're inserting something, no email, okay. You cannot create a new record without email. Got this? So now with the use of, so what we have done is we have used another context variable is insert here. So the same way you can use other is update, is delete and all that stuff as well, right? Okay. So let's do a small activity and then we'll do one more example here. So I just want you to write a trigger on account if industry is education, throw error. Okay, we do not work with education orgs anymore. That's what I want to do. Okay, so can we just go ahead and create this trigger? Just log in into your developer account, create a trigger on account, and that should be, if the industry is education, I want to throw an error message saying that we do not work with education industry anymore. All right.
I'm done, Jeet.
Okay. So we do not work with education orgs anymore. That's fine. All right. So, all right. Now what I want to do is, whenever I am creating an account with the education industry, let's say I want to make sure that description is updated to education account. So if we have thrown an error, I don't want to throw an error. I just want to make sure that the description is updated to education account. So next trigger that we want to write is a little more complex. So what we need is, we want a trigger on opportunity which will run this logic that any given user is not able to create opportunities more than worth 100K in a day. Okay, so it does not mean a single opportunity, it can be multiple opportunities, but the sum total of all the opportunities that a user creates in a day should be less than or at the max 100,000. Okay, so there is no limitation on how many opportunities you can create, but there is a limitation on the sum of all the opportunities that you have created on a given day. Got it? So let's say today you create an opportunity, first one 5,000, after that you create another one, sorry, you create another opportunity 10,000, you should be allowed, then you create another 20,000, you should be allowed, you can create again one more opportunity 5,000, fine, you create another one 20K, fine. But this way is, if the sum exceeds 100, then it should give you an error saying that you have already exceeded your quota. So like here it is 5 plus 10, 15 and 35, 40, 60. Now let's say if you're trying to add one more 45K, then you should get error. Okay, so I want my trigger to go back and check not only the record in context, but also the records which are already in the database. Okay, so how do we go about it? What should we do? You give me some initial idea and then I'll start writing the code. So what is that we have to do here?
We need to use today function.
Today function we will use, that's absolutely correct. Apart from that,
We need to sum the amount along with the today function. If it exceeds 100K, then we should throw an error.
right. So there are two parts, two things that we'll have to work on. For this trigger, there are two things that we'll have to consider. First is all the existing records which are already in the database, okay, which have been created today. So first thing, I should be able to check all the existing records which are already there in the database, and I should be able to do a sum of them. That's one. Second is, I need to consider the trigger.new records as well, the records which are being created, inserted now. So one, I check all the records which are already in the database. Second, I add to them the record which is getting inserted, and at that time I should throw an error. That will be fine. This is a record which is getting inserted, and if you add this, then it will exceed the total daily limit or whatever. Okay, so there are two ways of writing this. One, we can simply start writing this program from the trigger, but since we have seen this way of writing a trigger, I will show you another way of writing a trigger. The other way of trigger is, create a class, okay, and in the class define a method with an s object parameter, okay, and this s object parameter will be defined supplied as a trigger.new, okay. which will be taken from trigger.new. Okay. So create a class, define a method which has an subject parameter or list of a subject basically, and then write your code logic, write the logic in method. So whatever you want to check and do, that should be written inside that method, and then call the method. Sorry, then go ahead and create a trigger and call the method on the trigger. Is what we have to do. That's it. So you create a class, then you define a method with the subject parameter, list of object parameter, and the value to that parameter will be supplied by the trigger.new. Write the logic inside that method, whatever you want to do. Then go save that class, come out, create a trigger, and in that trigger, don't write all the logics or the entire code. You just all that you have to do is you just have to call that method on the trigger. That's it. Okay. So let's do it using the second approach. So first of all, let's go ahead and start writing a class. So go to setup, develop, fx classes, new class, public class, call it trigger class. Okay. Then inside this, what do we need to do? We need to create a method, right? So this should be a void method. Check op, whatever. This is a method name. This is a void method. And inside this method, as I told you, for this method, define a parameter. So my parameter is going to be list of opportunity. Oops. So I've defined a parameter also inside this. Okay. So this list of opportunity, while I call it on the trigger, I will replace this with the trigger.new. That's my plan. Okay. So any method that you're writing for to be called on trigger should have a parameter which is list of s object, so that you can replace that with a trigger.new. So that's fine. Now let's write the code here. For the code, as I told you, there are two things which I need to check. I need to check all the existing records. I also need to go ahead and check the records which are being created. So I'll write two for loops here. First for loop is for opportunity O1 within the existing list of records. So existing list of records I will fetch through the SOQL query. So I say select amount from opportunity where created date equals today. So this will only check the records which have been created today, and there is another logic that I want to put, that the created by user should be the current user. Okay. And created by ID equals user info dot get user ID dot get user ID. close here, and then the for loop starts in the for loop and save. Okay, all right. So opportunity O1 within this select amount from opportunity. So for all the records which have been created today and where the created by ID is the current user, it should go and check the amount. Okay. The other thing that I'll have to do is I have to do the sum of this. So what I'll need to do is I'll need to define a double here, double total amount, total amount plus equals one dot amount. Sorry. Okay. So I've defined a double total amount. This variable I will use to sum up all the opportunities, right? So my first loop runs for all the records which are already created by that user, okay, which are already existing in the database. So where the created date is today and the created by ID is the current user. So this loop will run and keep on adding the amount to this value, and total amount initially should be 0. So initially it should be 0, and then with every opportunity that amount keeps on getting added. So if there are 5, so it will come and add all those 5 in the loop. So the loop will run for 5 times, and this total amount will be sum of all those records, right? Okay. Now the other way, the other thing that we'll have to do is write another for loop. So this for loop, the one that we have already written, this is okay to go ahead and perform a calculation on all the existing records and do a sum of that. Okay, so that part is done. Now the second for loop which I need to write is for the records of the trigger.new, which will be stored into this variable ops. So I will write for opportunity O2 in ops, because this class does not know what is trigger.new, right? So it knows this parameter. So I'm going to use this. For this, again do the same thing. Total amount plus equals O2 dot amount in this case. Okay, so first of all, I run a loop for the existing records. And how do I get the existing records? Using the SQL query. Secondly, I run a loop for the trigger.new records. So for that, I have defined a variable here. And then my if condition, if total amount is greater than 100,000, then O2 dot add error. You have exceeded daily limit. That's it. Okay, is it clear? The concept of the code, what we have done? Please let me know if there is any question or doubt here on this.
Yes, Jeet.
Okay. So two for loops, one
The
for
first for loop is for is
existing records, which are already
yes.
there in the database, and the second for loop is for the records which are in context, which are being inserted using the trigger. Okay. So because my trigger, I told you for trigger always, so just come, consider this as trigger.new ops. Okay. So because we always use a trigger.new for this thing in a for loop, that is the reason why I've written the second for loop to check all the records in the trigger.new. That's it. Okay, you could have written the same code on the trigger itself. Okay, in that case you should have actually started with this part and then you should have written this, and instead of OPS you could have written trigger.new. Okay, but why I wanted to do this is because okay, in that case you should have started from line number 4. So this was method was not required. You should have started from line number 4 and you should have written this much inside the trigger code block. Okay, only thing that we have done is we have created the method with a parameter, and this parameter will be called there where, as a trigger.new, and that's it. Okay, so the class is ready, method is there. Now the only thing that I have to do is I just have to go ahead and call this trigger on the call this method on the trigger. Okay, so before you go there, just make sure you take the name of the class. Name of the class is trigger class. Name of the method also check op. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a trigger. So this is a trigger on opportunities. So all that I'll need to do is go to customize and then opportunities and then go to triggers, new. Okay, give it a name. Event is going to be before insert. And then here you don't have to write any bit of code, you just have to call this class.method name. Instead of this, use trigger.new here. That's it. Now let's see if it is working fine. I create a new opportunity. With an amount of 20,000. Created. I create second one 30,000. Created. I create a third one with, let's say, 35,000. Created. So 3 records I've created. 20 plus 30 is 50 plus 35, 85,000 I've created. So if I create another one with 20,000, it should ideally throw an error because I have already created opportunities worth 85,000. Yes, you have exceeded your daily limit. Okay, And let's say, what I want to do here is, I mean, in case you want to, let the end user know that what is the available limit, still left. What is the maximum opportunity amount you can use, and just define a variable there and, calculate the value of that and display. So that is something which can be done. Should not be a problem. Right?
Yes, please.
Please let me know if it is fine. Okay. All right. So that's how we can use triggers with to check some value on multiple records and perform some operation and do the check. All right. So let's do another activity. Let's work on the same logic. Okay, because that will be really easy for you. All right. So can you just
Okay.
quickly do this?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's work on the same. You have a different developer edition, right?
Yes.
All right. Oh, that's better.